Words can be learned as parts of longer sentences, and some words can be learned as one-word sentences through direct ostension of their objects. In either event, words mean only as their use in sentences is conditioned to sensory stimuli. Any realistic theory of evidence must be inseparable from the psychology of stimulus and response, applied to sentences. The pattern of conditioning is complex and inconstant from person to person. But there are points of general congruence. Johnson struck such a combination, putting himself in the way of a stimulus that would trigger an affirmative response from any of us to the question whether a stone is there. Calling a stone at close quarters is an extreme case. Evidence is deliberately marshaled only when there is more nearly an equilibrium between the sensory conditioning of an affirmative response and the contrary conditioning. Thus, the question under deliberation may be whether something glimpsed from a moving car was a stone. If the thing was glimpsed rather from a moving train, the checking operation may be impracticable. In this event, the question may be left frankly unresolved for lack of evidence, or tentatively resolved in the light of any available circumstantial evidence. Thus, if the region looks boulder-strewn and signs of man are scarce, we may guess that the thing was stone rather than paper. What we are doing when we amass circumstantial evidence is to let ourselves be actuated as sensitively as possible by chain stimulations, as they reverberate through our theory via the interanimation of sentences. Dr. Johnson's affirmative was firmly enough conditioned to withstand any contrary pull. But in the general case, evidence is a question of center of gravity. Commonly, we have to be governed by a delicate balancing of varied forces, transmitted across the fabric of sentences from remotely relevant stimuli. Prediction combines what the car example illustrates with what the train example illustrates. Thus, we may reach a verdict of stonehood by the indirect method of the train example, and still return to the spot to check. Prediction is in effect the conjectural anticipation of further sensory evidence for a foregone conclusion. When a prediction comes out wrong, what we have is a divergent and troublesome sensory stimulation that tends to inhibit that once foregone conclusion. Thus it is that theories wither when their predictions fail. In an extreme case, the theory may consist in such firmly conditioned connections between sentences that it withstands the failure of a prediction or two. We find ourselves excusing the failure of prediction as a mistake in observation, or a result of unexplained interference. The tail thus comes in an extremity to wag the dog. The sifting of evidence would seem to be a strangely passive affair. What conscious policy does one follow then when not simply passive? Consciously, the quest seems to be for the simplest story. Yet this supposed quality of simplicity is more easily sensed than described. Perhaps our vaunted sense of simplicity is in many cases just a feeling of conviction, attaching to the blind resultant of the interplay of chain stimulations. At any rate, simplicity considerations may be said to determine even the most casual acts of recognition. for the observer is continually having to decide whether to construe two encounters as repeated encounters with an identical object, or as encounters with two distinct objects. And he decides in such a way as to minimize such factors as multiplicity of objects and swiftness of interim change of quality and position. The deliberate scientist goes on in essentially the same way, if more adroitly. And a law of least action remains prominent among his guiding principles. Simplicity, by his lights, is just what guides his extrapolation. Simplicity is of the essence of statistical inference. If his data are represented by points on a graph, and his law is to be represented by a curve through the points, he draws the smoothest, simplest such curve he can. He even forces the points a little bit to make it simpler, pleading in accuracy of measurement. Simplicity is not a desideratum on a par with conformity to observation. Observation serves to test hypotheses after adoption. Simplicity prompts their adoption for testing. Still, decisive observation is commonly long delayed or impossible. And insofar, at least simplicity is final arbiter. Whatever simplicity is, it is no casual hobby. The neurological mechanism of the drive for simplicity is undoubtedly fundamental, though unknown, and its survival value overwhelming. One incidental benefit of simplicity is that it tends to enhance a theory's scope, its richness in observable consequences. In general, the simpler a theory is, the smaller the sample of prior observations that will have sufficed to suggest it. Simplicity also engenders good working conditions for the continued activity of the creative imagination. For the simpler a theory, the more easily we can keep relevant considerations in mind. But another quality, which is perhaps equally valuable on this score, is familiarity of principle. Familiarity of principle is what we are after when we contrive to explain new matters by old laws. For example, when we devise a molecular hypothesis in order to bring the phenomena of heat under the familiar old laws of mechanics. Familiarity of principle also figures when unexpected observations prompt us to revise an old theory. The way in which familiarity of principle then figures is in favoring minimum revision. The helpfulness of familiarity of principle is a sort of paradox. Conservatism, a favoring of the inherited conceptual scheme, is at once the counsel of laziness and a strategy of discovery. Whenever simplicity and conservatism are known to counsel opposite courses, the verdict of conscious methodology is on the side of simplicity. Conservatism is nevertheless the preponderant force, but no wonder it can still operate when stamina and imagination fail. Yet another principle that may be said to figure as a tacit guide of science is that of sufficient reason. A lingering trace of this venerable principle seems recognizable in the scientist's shunning of gratuitous singularities. Still, his separation of statements about molecules into true and false would remain largely unsettled. Conceivably, the truths about molecules are only partially determined by any ideal scientific method. For in general, the simplest possible theory to a given purpose need not be unique. Actually, the truths that can be said even about ordinary things are themselves far in excess of any available data. Both sorts of events are less than determined by our surface irritations. For we can never do better than occupy the standpoint of some theory or other, the best we can muster at the time. What reality is like is the business of scientists to surmise. And what there is, what is real, is part of that question. The last arbiter is so-called scientific method, however amorphous. Scientific method was vaguely seen as a matter of being guided by sensory stimuli, a taste for simplicity, and a taste for old things. It produces theory whose connection with all possible surface irritation consists solely in scientific method itself. This is the sense in which it is the last arbiter of truth. Peirce was tempted to define truth outright in terms of scientific method as the ideal theory which is approached as a limit. But there is a lot wrong with Peirce's notion besides its assumption of a final organon of scientific method. There is a faulty use of numerical analogy in speaking of a limit of theories. Since the notion of limit depends on that of nearer than which is defined for numbers and not for theories. And even if we bypass such troubles, still there is trouble in the imputation of uniqueness. We have no reason to suppose that man's surface irritations, even unto eternity, admit of any one systematization that is scientifically better than all others. Scientific method is the way to truth, but it affords even in principle no unique definition of truth. After that reflection, there may be some consolation in the following one. If there were a unique, best total systematization of science, still, we should not thereby have defined truth for actual single sentences, unless pretty firmly and directly conditioned to sensory stimulation. A sentence is meaningless except relative to its own theory. It is rather when we turn back into the midst of an actually present theory, until by what is vaguely called scientific method, we change them here and there for the better. Within our own total evolving doctrine, we can judge truth as earnestly and absolutely as can be, subject to correction, but that goes without saying.